Hi everyone, today we will briefly talk about the Kantian ethics. Before starting our video, please subscribe my channel and support my channel. If you like it, please click the like button. After that, let's start. Immanuel Kant is regarded as one of the most brilliant intellects of all time, but he is also regarded as one of the most difficult of all philosophers to read. Kant spent his whole life in a small town of Königsberg in the eastern Prussia. When he was 16, he entered the University of Königsberg. After he completed his university courses, he spent 8 years as a family tutor. When he was 46, he was appointed to the chair of the philosophy. He taught logic and philosophy at the university. Also, interestingly, he scheduled his activity with such precision that neighbors could set up their clocks when he stepped out of his house at 4:30 to walk up and down his avenue 8 times. As I said, he lived in the Prussian city Königsberg his entire life. He never traveled and is famous for his methodic and rigorous lifestyle and high work ethics. He will begin his lecture 7 o'clock in the morning, and he was so popular with students that they had to arrive an hour early to secure themselves a seat. As he raised to fame, scholars from all over Europe would travel to the Königsberg to see him lecturing. It is said that the lectures that preceded the work were reading grounding of metaphysics of morals were so gripping to the audience that they felt they were listening to a revelation. In addition to that, Kant was never married, nor did have any kind of romantic relationship. On the other hand, Kant was an entertaining, engaging, and witty conversationalist, although we do not find much humor in his studies. Kant seems to be also have been popular as a guest in the better society and seems to have a good sense of humor. Kant has dealt with almost all aspects of philosophy and even science. His three so-called critiques, critique of pure reason, critique of practical reason, and critique of judgment, deal respectively with the 3 most important branches of philosophy: knowledge / mind, ethics / morals, and statics. Kant's first major treatise on ethics is the foundations of the metaphysics of morals. Besides these works, he wrote important treatises about physics, astronomy, logic, religion, anthropology, politics, and education. After this brief biography of the Kant, now we will focus on the important concepts of his ethics. One of the most important concepts of his ethics in the Kantian ethics, it's the goodwill. When we explain a person's behavior, such as bringing an umbrella, we take his desire into account as well as his beliefs. We also have to consider whether to act on a desire because in many cases we need to resist the desire and not to act to satisfy it. In this case, we are talking about willpower. We can say that a person who successfully resists the temptation of desire has willpower. The person who does not lack willpower, we ought to evaluate our desires with our reason. So, what is a goodwill? What it is like to act with a goodwill? For Kant, the goodwill is a good intention to do the morally right thing. Also, to have a goodwill is to act out of respect for moral law or to act from duty. To have a goodwill is not to act from inclination. A person who acts with a goodwill, a person whose actions have unconditional worth, is a person who endeavors to do what is right, just because it is required by the moral law. Secondly, a goodwill is good for its own sake. According to Kant, nothing is good without qualification except for a goodwill. Happiness cannot be good for its own sake, because it cannot always make an act good. For example, if a killer got pleasure from his murdering, it cannot make his act better. Also, intelligence, reasoning correctly, courage cannot make an act good or bad. Only can the goodwill do. But the problem is that not all well-intended act is morally right. Second concept in the Kantian ethics is hypothetical and categorical imperatives. Any human act implies some principle. Kant calls this maxim. Moral principles can be viewed as imperatives. For example, never lie is an imperative. First, imperatives, something ought to be done or it would be good to do it. You can describe like this. What is hypothetical imperatives? The imperative is hypothetical if the action is good only as a means to something else. For example, if X promotes happiness of society, then doing X or attend class regularly if you want to get an A with this course. Therefore, a hypothetical imperative is the one that should be obeyed under certain conditions. At this point, what is categorical imperatives? The imperative is categorical if the act is good for its own sake. Therefore, a categorical imperative is the one that must be obeyed under all conditions. For Kant, all moral principles are categorical imperatives. Therefore, his theory of morality is known as the categorical imperative. Now, we will briefly look the first formulation of the categorical imperative. The relation between his theory of the goodwill and his theory of the first formulation of the categorical imperative is that the will provides the motive, and the motive for a rational being should be a maxim or principle. The theory of the categorical imperative will provide a theory of how we can determine a principle is appropriate. For Kant, the first formulation, if it is morally permissible for someone to perform a certain action in a certain condition, then it is morally permissible for anyone to perform that action in a similar situation. Now, here is the first formulation: act only on that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Whenever you act on some maxim or principle, whether your act is morally right or not depends on whether the maxim or principle you act on is universalizable or reversible. Now, what is universalisability criterion? A principle is universalizable if everyone could act on it. Not all principles are universalizable. For example, borrow money on the basis of a false promise whenever you need it. Whenever I need money and have to lie, I can borrow money on a false promise maxim. Whenever anyone needs money and has to lie, he or she can borrow money on a false promise. Why can this principle cannot be universalized? The reason behind is that it contains a contradiction. Also, it assumes that everyone will lend money on promises. However, on the other hand, it assumes everyone can break their promise whenever they feel like it. If everyone acted on it, no one could be trusted to pay back a loan, and then no one would like to loan any money in the first place. Therefore, the principle above is not universalizable, and it is not morally permissible to act on that principle. So what is reversibility criterion also? A principle is reversible if the agent who acts on that principle will be willing to have everyone act on it. It is similar to the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them to unto you. Put yourself in the other person's shoes and determine what is right to do. The difference between the reversibility criterion and the golden rule is that the former, the reversibility criterion, focuses on the principles, but the later, the golden rule, focuses on people involved. if you will be willing to have everyone act on that principle, it is reversible. Not every principle is reversible. For example, cheating on the exam is not reversible because you do not want others cheat on you. The case of some father may pass Universalisability criterion but may not pass Reversibility criterion. Therefore, according to the first formulation, an act is morally right if and only if everyone could act on the principle implied by that act, and the agent would be willing to have everyone act on it. But there are problems with the first formulation. When we apply the first formulation, it yields some incorrect results. First, it makes some immoral acts become moral. For example, kill all the Jews can pass the first formulation because it involves no contradiction. Everyone can act on it, and so it is universalizable. And if the Nazi fanatic were willing to have himself killed, even if he were a Jew, the principle is reversible. So Kant's first formulation is too objective. Anyone can make an immoral principle to pass the test by adding something to the antecedent, like the agent has such and such genetic code. Secondly, it makes some innocent acts become immoral. Assume that someone does not want to become a doctor. Obviously, he cannot will the maximum of not becoming a doctor be a universal law, because he would not be willing to have everyone act on it. Thirdly, Kantian ethics cannot explain exceptions of duties. There are no perfect duties. Every duty has exceptions. So, this is the end of our video. In this video, we will briefly talk about Kant, biography of the Kant, and then his important concepts in his ethics, in his moral philosophy. If you like it, please click the like button. Also, please subscribe my channel and support my channel. See you.